Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. The Chinese government has rolled back on its restrictive COVID rules after zero COVID policy sparked outrage across the country. Let me take you through the key changes that were announced by Beijing's National Health Commission. People who have tested positive for COVID but with mild or no symptoms can isolate at home. Residents can also buy medicines without restrictions. The government has also relaxed lockdown rules. Snap lockdowns will be applied on specific areas. Instead of shutting down the entire neighborhood, the lockdowns will also be lifted if no new cases are found for 5 consecutive cases. Officials have also scrapped frequent mass testing, and only employees in high-risk positions will need to take regular tests. Joining me now to take this forward is James Miles, China writer-at-large at The Economist. Thank you for joining us on CNBC-TV18. James, give us a sense of how the easing of COVID curbs has really played out for people, for the average Chinese person.
Well, I think this has been a huge surprise, a surprise to many people outside China, trying to work out how China would exit from its zero COVID policy. Nobody expected such a rapid transition as we've seen in the past few days. And a surprise for many, many people in China who have been told for the past 3 years that COVID is a severe threat to them, not just to elderly and vulnerable people, but to the population at large, that the rest of the world has handled this terribly, and particularly Western countries, and nightly news in China has until very recently been focusing on deaths in America, hospitals overwhelmed. And so now we've had a sudden switch whereby people are being told that the virus is really not much worse than the common cold, that you can stay at home and not have to go off to government quarantine centers if you're infected by the virus, that basically life is going to be pretty much back to normal. The widespread lockdowns, the mass testing we've seen over the past few months will no longer happen.
James, do you also think that China is unprepared for lifting these COVID curves? There are also reports which suggest that people are worried about a spike in COVID cases now.
Well, that is indeed a fear, and very, very difficult to get the measure of what the trends are now with infections and indeed deaths as a result of COVID. We've seen over the past 3 years, quite an intense effort by the government to be open with these figures, and that's been in their interest because they've wanted to reinforce the message that COVID is something to be deeply worried about, and therefore it's necessary for people to comply with these very strict lockdown measures. But now, because of the easing of testing requirements, I think it's very likely that a large number of infected people are not being detected. Oddly, in spite of what we suppose to be a surge in the number of cases, the number of deaths has remained tiny. So I think we're going to find it increasingly difficult in the days and weeks ahead to work out what's going on.
Right. The manufacturing sector, even Foxconn, they had all flagged concerns about the impact of these COVID curbs on the Chinese economy, how that this could worsen the slowdown as well. Do you think the Chinese leadership has finally realized that this zero COVID policy was hurting its economy? And the protests that we've seen, the widespread protests in China over the past few weeks, they also contributed to this?
Well, I think both are very likely to have played a role in this. The Chinese authorities have been showing signs of concern for some time about the impact of these lockdowns on the economy, and have been stressing the need to maintain economic stability at the same time as maintaining these tight lockdown restrictions. And then you had the protests at the end of November, where people were surprisingly, we hadn't seen this since the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, saying that, they disagree with the government. They don't want these kind of lockdown measures, and enough is enough. And I think both of those pressures have now come together and have forced the government to move faster, perhaps, than it might otherwise have.
Right. And my final question, are manufacturing facilities lifting curbs as fast as they have been announced, or are people taking their time?
Well, it's going to be very difficult for manufacturers, and indeed difficult for local governments that are responsible for getting their economies going, because it's not entirely clear what sort of repercussions there might be should cases surge. Will local officials get in trouble as a result of that? How will factories respond should large numbers of their workers become infected? And anecdotally, we're hearing, from our team in Beijing that quite a few of the people around them are now reporting infection with COVID. So I think even though there has been quite a positive response among investors to the possibility that over the next few months, China will ease considerably and its economy will get back to normal, it's going to be a very bumpy ride, and we could see, much disruption in the manufacturing sector as infections surge.
All right. Thank you very much, James Miles, for joining us on the broadcast, telling us about the COVID curbs and how they have been lifted in China, the impact this could have on the economy as well. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.